So the first question is, in your opinion, what did COVID-19 mean for our education system? For example, did you see more shifts to homeschooling as an option?
A lot happened relative to COVID. Parents became much more aware of what their children were getting educationally. So they're more aware of what was in the curriculum, not generally pleased with what they saw in the curriculum or how it moved. Became more aware that their students were supposedly being taught something and then tested, never to be discussed again. And we're aware that the kids weren't really retaining a lot of information. Uh, Part of what happened with this, public education over this period lost about 4% of the school population. Private schools gained about 7%, and homeschooling increased about 50%. Right. So there was a very significant increase in home education since COVID started. And it's declined a little bit over the past 6 or 9 months, but I think it's going to hold pretty steady. So we're going to see more and more, I think, home education.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Um I think I did see that even in my own personal life. I had a lot of friends. I think COVID hit when I was in seventh grade, and like a bunch of my friends ended up moving to private schools, and I just never seen them again. So yeah, I don't know. It really did impact our lives. So I can see why homeschooling definitely increased during that period, because it was a lot for the public education system to handle and parents as well.
Yeah, and part of what impacted it was a lot of parents started working from home and had more flexible hours, so homeschooling became something that was functional for them where it had not been before.
Okay, that makes sense. I didn't think of it that way. Okay, great. Thank you so much. The next question is, what are the biggest problems teachers and or students are facing in the classroom? I know you're more like concentrated and your expertise is more in homeschooling, but I was wondering if you knew how that like intersected with each other.
No, absolutely. We do a lot of home-based education. We also work with a lot of families whose kids attend school and try to make that as functional as we possibly can. Uh, the, there are a number of basic problems with schools and classrooms as they exist. All right. Number one is in a classroom, pretty much everyone receives the same curriculum, the same instruction, the same way. The problem is the students don't all function at the same level. They have different amount of knowledge they're coming into the class with, and they have very, very significant differences in how they can process information and manipulate information mentally. And in a typical classroom, there can easily be 3 years difference in the knowledge base and the ability to process information. Right. So in a classroom where you've got 30 kids, all right, we've got that huge range and everyone's getting the same thing the same way. That is way, way, way from being efficient. Right. Then we have, you know, the basic foundation of learning is neuroplasticity. Right. When you learn something, you actually change the brain. If you haven't changed the brain, you haven't learned it. Right. Neuroplasticity has some basic tenets. The first is to utilize neuroplasticity, we need to provide the brain with targeted input, targeted to the individual. And as I mentioned, a typical classroom, got this huge range of function, huge range of knowledge. Right. If you're targeting 5% of that classroom population, you're doing well. All right. So it becomes less and less efficient. Right. Then the other parts of neuroplasticity, beyond targeted input, is we provide the input with sufficient frequency, intensity, and duration. Okay. Of those three pieces, intensity is the most important piece. Right? If somebody's presenting something and it's really interesting to you, and you're really paying attention, and you're getting it with a lot of intensity, the odds are pretty good you're going to remember it. So the less targeted it is, the less intensity of input, the less effective, efficient it is. As an example, if you talk to some people who are 10 years out of college, all right, and you ask them, tell me the 3 things you remember most from college, okay? The odds are none of those things occurred in the classroom. Okay, it was what happened outside of classrooms. That's where the intensity was. That's what they remember. That's what they learned. Right? We tend to think that teaching is synonymous with learning. It's not at all. Right? Most of what supposedly goes in, if hopefully even temporarily, and doesn't get into long-term memory. And really, if it doesn't get into long-term memory, what good did it do?
Yeah.
Right? So, we're ignoring the basic tenets of how we learn in education as it's being done today. That has to change.
Wow. Thank you. I learned a lot. I was genuinely so interested in what you were talking about, and I found some parallels to like actually a test I just took today. I'm taking AP psychology, and our chapter was actually about memory and learning. So, when you mentioned neuroplasticity, I was like, this is going to be so amazing because I think the intersectionality between psychology and learning is so important. And you like said such informative, amazing things. We'll definitely be using this.
But part of it's significant. Neuroplasticity is not new knowledge.
Mhm.
I understood neuroplasticity 60 years ago.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, what's happening in the psych department doesn't transfer to the Department of Education. And many departments of education in colleges around the country, many of the professors are graduates of that department, and they tend to keep perpetuating the same things over and over again
Mhm.
and not changing, not developing, not modifying.
See. Okay. Yeah. I definitely have heard like people mention that before, like how with like changing times, new technology, new discoveries from like psychology, um, the education department is not keeping up. Do you know why that is? Like what the barriers might be for that?
In many universities, the Department of Education is almost an entity into itself. All right. And there's not a lot of transfer that goes on. And often the people in the Department of Education, everything is done in that Department of Education, and it's not, you know, a broader range of education, broader range of individuals. And if you will, the perspective is generally not to change. It's we're going to teach you what we've been doing, and you can go ahead and go do that yourself.
Thank you. That makes sense. Sorry for like the noises in the background. My dad is like being loud, but thank you so much. The next question is, do you think anything should be done to change American school curricula? If so, what? Or are there any alternatives? You can maybe speak to homeschooling about this, and if you think, you'd recommend it and, things like that. Just yeah.
Yeah, we could probably speak on that for a week. There's not much that I think is being done today in schools that I would encourage. All right. Let's start with something obvious. All right. Everyone pretty much knows that our place internationally in math instruction is falling every year. All right. Now, that's called data. Right. And data doesn't do you any good unless you use the data. So the data is saying our math curriculum does not work. And not only does our math curriculum not work, Common Core math was essentially used in the 1960s, and they called it new math. All right. New math failed in the 60s. All right. Why they think it should work now, I don't know. All right. But it obviously doesn't. You know, I have families I work with the parents are both have PhDs, and they can't understand their third graders' math homework. There's something wrong with that. All right. You know, so the math curriculum does not work. And it's, you know, if you will, it's based on, we're going to teach math through concept. Right. Well, essentially, to teach concept, you have to have data. All right. You have to have foundational information, and then you can form a concept. They're trying to teach you a concept without the foundational information. All right. And it didn't work in the 60s. It doesn't work today. And we're graduating kids who really don't understand math. Right? And as a country, we're getting further and further behind, and we can't afford to do that. Math is too important. Right? You know, the next aspect of curriculum is essentially referring back a little bit to what I said previously, it's kind of one size fits all. You know, this is where we are this week. This is what we teach this week. We're going to give it to you all the same way. And some of you will learn it. Some of you won't learn it. Most of you will forget it. And so be it. All right. That's insane. All right. It just flat out doesn't work. All right. Then we've got, one of the hugely important pieces that should be foundational to education is developing what we call processing skills. Short-term memory, working memory, executive function. Right? Let me give you a formula. I created a formula decades ago now. Essentially, your innate potential to the power of your processing plus education determines your function. Okay. And a neuroscientist in UCLA kind of modified that recently. I like his modification. He says simply, your reverse auditory digit span, and I'll explain that in a minute, plus your vocabulary and general knowledge determines your functional intelligence. Okay. That's important stuff. All right. And why it's so important is processing skills develop, and they develop based on opportunity and specific input. So when I'm working with children across the spectrum, almost universally, the most important thing we work on is processing skills. Right? I can take a child, for example, with a learning disability who has ADHD, generally, which is a reflection of low processing ability. Right? And we can develop their processing, and within a year, they're functioning typically, and in another year, they're functioning on a superior level because we've taken their processing from down here and taken it up there. All right? And it's easy. All right? It's not hard to do. All right? But the educational system doesn't do it. And again, this isn't new information. It's ignored information. All right? Virtually every child has the ability to be smarter. All right? If we work on it. All right? And the educational system doesn't even want to acknowledge it, let alone work on it. Is it easier to teach a smart child than a child who's not so smart? Of course it is. All right. Why not make them all smarter? All right. We have the ability to do that. We have the knowledge, and we have tools to do that. All right. And it's ignored. That's insane. All right. And tragic. All right. Because we have an entire population that's not achieving their innate potentials because they have not had the opportunity to develop their processing skills. And if you're not working on it specifically, how it develops is pretty much just a reflection of the opportunities you have, all right, within your home, your community, and your school. So we have the kids who are in deprived environments, all right, who don't develop their processing skills. We have kids who are in more enriched environments, develop better processing skills. And we keep perpetuating that same inequality where we have the ability to provide all those kids with better opportunities to target and develop their ability to process. Okay? So those pieces are the short-term memory, which is how much you can take in of what you hear and what you see. Then your working memory, which is now being called the new IQ, appropriately, which is how many pieces you can hold together and manipulate. All right. That's cognition, that's thinking. Big deal. All right. And then your working memory produces what's called executive function. And executive function are all of those things that permit us to function well as adults. The ability to prioritize, the ability to organize, the ability to structure, the ability to stop ourselves from doing things we know we shouldn't do. That's executive function. So if we look at the people in society who often are not functional, it's because they lack the executive function, and they lack the executive function because they don't have the working memory, and they don't have the working memory because they never developed the short-term memory. Okay? And we have the ability to change that for everybody. It's easy. we just have to say, yes, this is important and we need to do it. So in terms of what's happening in the system, we got to start off by working on simply the foundation of what permits our kids to learn and think. So that's rather important. And if I were going to change the curriculum right off the top of the list, I would put developing processing skills at the top of the list. We literally can take kids with learning disabilities and within years having them function at the top of their class and their group by developing the processing. So really important.
Yeah, that is very impressive. I did not I'm learning about it. And I just took a test about it, but I feel like the way you explained it like attaches like a deeper meaning to like the whole aspect of, intelligence and whether or not that's something that can be changed. And I that is so interesting because I don't know, I never thought of it that way. And I guess I can honestly see my own growth in that way. I guess I started, cultivating my working memory and my I don't even ability to process. And I guess that
Yes.
was due to me being born into a fortunate family and being able to get resources and aid in that way. And I definitely do think that, deprived communities like you speak of deserve that chance. And other kids who may not have the foundation, like I guess, or encouragement from family and the culture or environment in which you can cultivate it, they also need the chance. And that starts with the curriculum, like you mentioned. Um, I think that is so important. And
Yeah, a lot of my work is with special needs kids,
yeah,
and
that too.
it's particularly obvious in special needs kids.
Mhm.
For example, I could have a child with Down syndrome who's 3 years old, okay, who has the processing skills of a 1-year-old, right? And because of that, they have the function of a 1-year-old. So they're not yet talking. They're not yet understanding much of what's going on. They don't even know how to play by themselves, right? And to change their function, I have to change their processing. And as I do it, each step, their language changes, their cognition changes, their interaction changes. Everything is based on that. Really, incredibly important.
That's so incredible. Wow. Thank you for explaining that. I learned a lot. This makes psychology like 10 times more interesting. I feel like the way you explained it.
Now we'll have to quiz you in 10 years and see if you remember it, to see if you actually learned it.
I honestly think I did because I was genuinely so interested. You saw me like thinking probably because like I feel like the way you explained it was so different from how my psychology teacher explains things. And like I guess the way he explains it is like more of like textbook definition, but the way you applied it to like, even like my situation and like, with I don't know, just the way you explained it was really good. And thanks for that. All right. So for the next question, um, has the threat of school violence ushered in more homeschooling interests? If so, how?
Well, I think yes, it has impacted to to a degree, and to varying degrees, depending, I think, on how close families are to where that occurs. Right. You know, but there are a lot of factors that are contributing to more homeschooling. And the violence, is one of them and one of the lesser ones. Parents are just becoming more and more aware of how little impact they have on the schools, a little impact they have on their child's education. If you will, the parent is the world's greatest expert on their child. Right. And you can ask most any parent, how often does the school ask you to help them to teach them about your child? Right. Virtually never. Virtually never. And to be successful, you really need to understand and work with the whole child. And you can't do that without the parent who's the world's greatest expert on their kids. Right. So parents are, became more aware that, hey, the school doesn't know my child. And apparently they don't particularly care because they never asked me. Right. And then we've got, an awareness that you got, typical kids spend 6 hours in classrooms, maybe another hour transportation to and from school, then another hour or two of homework. Right. And the parents realize my child has no time to go out and exercise. My child has no time to play. My child has no time to become a reader because there's so many things demanded of them in the school day. All right. So they don't become readers. They don't become learners. They don't have time for chores, so they don't learn about responsibility and independence. All right. So, the system's not working for so many people and they're getting it. And home education certainly is an alternative.
Yeah, I can honestly see that 100%. I actually think about that a lot of days. Like, I barely go outside because I'm so busy all the time. And actually, it took me a while though to start reading again. I used to be a very avid reader as a young child, but I think the school system and my busy schedule tore me away from that love. And I finally got reunited with my books because of a teacher who was passionate to show me that. But it took like individual connection. And like I am more of like a outspoken, I guess, person who can, connect with people on that level and my teachers too. But imagine like the kids who can't. And I think what you mentioned is very like important. Like the idea to understand the whole child. Like I agree 100%.
You know, and if you will, if you can teach a child to become an independent, motivated reader, there's no limits to what they can learn. You know, but you got to read.
Yeah.
You know?
I so agree. I love reading.
Yeah.
It's so important. I'm trying to like make my sister read more.
I'd say every opportunity I have to talk to a kid who's about to graduate from high school, or in a couple first years of college, I'll quiz them, all right, on things like general knowledge and reading. The number of kids graduating with good grades who will admit they've never read a book is shocking. Okay? Cliff notes, all right, or skim it. But reading an entire book from beginning, no, I never did that. Ask them, gee, tell me a book you read that you really enjoyed. They're stuck. All right. And then you ask general information, ask something obvious like, where's Spain? Oh, and that's in Central America, right? No.
No.
And you were an A student in high school, right? And you graduated. I mean, what they don't know, we go back to that formula, general knowledge and vocabulary, they don't have it. They're not coming out of all this curriculum with good general knowledge and information to be able to function in society.
Oh, thank you. That is I feel like you understand. Okay. This is so perfect. Um, I think that's so important. I feel like that's really missing too. I feel like even like I have international friends who literally make fun of like the American stereotype of not being able to know like general knowledge, like geographic, civic engage like civic knowledge. And like I think it's so important as well. And even just reading, opening a book, it offers you so many perspectives that are so important.
And in terms of perspective, I work internationally. And talking to kids, for example, I have a large caseload in Romania. All right. And most people's opinion of Romania is it's not a country that weighs up. What these kids are learning in school and come out of with school is generally so superior to what our kids have. Not to mention they can speak 2 or 3 languages, when they graduate as well. Uh, we're just not competing. All right, because we're losing sight of what education is and what the individual is. And another aspect of that is I wrote an article about the most important meal of the day. All right. And it's not breakfast. All right. It's the meal you have as a family. All right. The potential of educational potential of families just having meals together and parents sharing what they know is incredibly powerful. Right. And we're losing that as a society. All right. It's shocking how many families there isn't such a thing as a family meal anymore.
Oh,
Particularly one where they sit and actually share knowledge and information and talk.
yeah. Oh my gosh. Now that you mention it, I didn't like realize how important it is. Like I do have family dinner. Actually, I need to go soon, but we'll give it like 10 more minutes because yeah. Um but yeah, I do think a lot of like discussion happens with my parents and I learn a lot of things in terms of like from my dad's experience, like his working experience, and I feel like that's made me a better person, more knowledgeable about the general world, things that like I can't get from the school curriculum per se. Yeah,
Absolutely. Yep.
that is so important. Thank you for talking about that. And then I guess second to last question is why is improving our education system or other alternatives important to our country?
Well, you will. How our society function is based on the function of our individuals in our country. Right? And if we're not educating our populace, if we're not building, again, going back to the processing skills and functional intelligence, what do we have? We have a population that's easily led, easily influenced, easily controlled, and powerless. Okay? So education and developing the foundation of being able to process information and think and general knowledge is hugely important, or will cease to exist as a successful society.
Thank you. That is well said, and I couldn't have put it in better words. Oh my gosh, this is perfect. Okay, and then the last question is, what sorts of things would you like to say to any students watching?
I think what I tell kids all the time, particularly those who are in school. Right? And to be honest with you, the families I work with, if it's possible for them to homeschool, they do. All right, that's not possible for every family to do because often both parents have to work. But if the kids have to go to school, essentially the reality is the educational system has a lot of shortcomings. Okay? that is what is, right? But as an individual, you are responsible for your education. And put at the top of your list your processing, and then reading, because today you've got access to all human knowledge within seconds. You don't need someone to spoon feed you. All right. If you can read, you can learn virtually anything. So be responsible for your own education. Don't blame a teacher, don't blame a school, don't blame the system, don't blame the curriculum. All right. Because ultimately it's your responsibility. And ultimately you are in control. Right. And you can learn whatever you want to learn. Just do it. So don't rely on schools to provide your education. You can provide your own education.
Absolutely. I agree. Oh my gosh. I just think the amount of things I've learned just from, doing certain extracurriculars outside of the school like campus, whether that be like international teams or, just talking to people from around the globe, like offering those perspectives and that work experience is so much, it's very valuable. Like even in comparison to what we learn in textbooks, it makes things a reality. We're more in touch of humanity, more in touch with the things we don't see in maybe a bubbled in community. So I 100% agree with the whole idea of taking it into your own hands. I think it's so, so important. Thank you for speaking about that.
You're obviously a reader, and those of us who are readers know we can learn anything we want. And unfortunately, those people who are not readers just don't have that concept. All right, I can't learn this unless somebody spoon feeds it to me. One of the things I hear occasionally that upsets me as an adult, I said, boy, I wish I had a chance to go take a class in this and that. I'd like to learn it. And it's like, you don't need a class. Open a book,
Exactly.
read it, learn it.
Right. Yeah, even like with the internet, I feel like I've learned I didn't even have a mentor or anybody to guide me through a lot of the things I learned. And one of them was like learning how to digitally draw, to create full productions and lead like teams. And I didn't learn that from a teacher from a class. I literally looked up online how to do this. It's just resources. And I feel, yeah, even reading as a young child has made me realize that it's possible to get an inventory right at you know, like right there.
Well, I find it so tragic that the kids today are academically behind where I was and where my peers were as kids.
Mm.
And to put it in perspective, I had to ride my bicycle 3 miles to our library, which was a house. Okay. All right. And now, the kids carry around these things that have more information than all the libraries in the state, right? If they use it for that, which they don't.
Mm.
But it's so easy. We have so much access to so much information and knowledge today if we use it. Yeah.
Yeah, that is so important. Thank you for speaking about all these topics. I think honestly, if I'm gonna be dead honest, like my interview with you has been probably the most informative, the most interesting, and the most thought-provoking that conversation I've had with anybody so far. And thank you for that. I appreciate this, these 30 minutes.
I hope you're successful and you get your information out. And
Thank you. Thank you
you
so
did
much.
you did a great job.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.